Jacob be flexing crew. Jacob be flexing crew. Is this thing on? Is this thing on? Yes, sir. How are we doing? How are we doing? Welcome, welcome. All right. If you remember last time, we completed rule number 4 of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. And today, we're getting right into a banger. Rule number 5. Get your popcorn ready. Get your Dr. Peppers ready. Listen, we're going to gain some knowledge. If you learn anything, please leave a like. If you want to learn more, please subscribe. Become a flexer today. Thank you all so much. I love you all. Let's get right into it. Rule number 5. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Actually, it's not okay. Recently, I watched a 3-year-old boy trail his mother and father slowly through a crowded airport. He was screaming violently at 5-second intervals, and, more important, he was doing it voluntarily. He wasn't at the end of his tether. As a parent, I could tell from the tone. He was irritating his parents and hundreds of other people to gain attention. Maybe he needed something, but that was no way to get it, and his parents should have let him know that. You might object that perhaps they were worn out and jet-lagged after a long trip, but 30 seconds of carefully directed problem-solving would have brought the shameful episode to a halt. More thoughtful parents would not have let someone they truly cared for become the object of a crowd's contempt. I have also watched a couple, unable or unwilling to say no to their 2-year-old, obliged to follow closely behind him everywhere he went. Every moment of what was supposed to be an enjoyable social visit, because he misbehaved so badly when not micromanaged that he could not be given a second of genuine freedom without risk. The desire of his parents to let their child act without correction on every impulse perversely produced precisely the opposite effect. They deprived him instead of every opportunity to engage in independent action. Because they did not dare to teach him what no means, he had no conception of the reasonable limits enabling maximal toddler autonomy. It was a classic example of too much chaos breeding too much order, and the inevitable reversal. I have similarly seen parents rendered unable to engage in adult conversation at a dinner party because their children, 4 and 5, dominated the social scene. Eating the centers out of all the sliced bread, subjecting everyone to their juvenile tyranny, while mom and dad watched, embarrassed and bereft of the ability to intervene. When my now adult daughter was a child, another child once hit her on the head with a metal toy truck. I watched that same child 1 year later viciously push his younger sister backwards over a fragile glass service coffee table. His mother picked him up immediately afterward, but not her frightened daughter, and told him in hushed tones not to do such things, while she patted him comfortingly in a manner clearly indicative of approval. She was out to produce a little god emperor of the universe. That's the unstated goal of many a mother, including many who consider themselves advocates for full gender equality. Such women will object vociferously to any command uttered by an adult male, but will trot off in seconds to make their progeny a peanut butter sandwich if he demands it, while immersed self-importantly in a video game. The future mates of such boys have every reason to hate their mothers-in-law. Respect for women, that's for other boys, other men, not for their dear sons. Not for their dear sons. Something of the same sort may underlie, in part, the preference for male children seen most particularly in places such as India, Pakistan, and China, where sex-selective abortion is widely practiced. The Wikipedia entry for that practice attributes its existence to cultural norms, favoring male over female children. I cite Wikipedia because it is collectively written and edited and, therefore, the perfect place to find accepted wisdom. But there's no evidence that such ideas are strictly cultural. There are plausible psychobiological reasons for the evolution of such an attitude, and they're not pretty, from a modern egalitarian perspective. If circumstances force you to put all your eggs into one basket, so to speak, a son is a better bet, by the strict standards of evolutionary logic, where the proliferation of your genes is all that matters. Why? Well, a reproductively successful daughter might gain you 8 or 9 children. The Holocaust survivor Gita Schwartz, a star in this regard, had 3 generations of direct descendants who matched such performance. She was the ancestor of almost 2,000 people by the time of her death in 2010. But the sky is truly the limit with the reproductively successful son. Sex with multiple female partners is his ticket to exponential reproduction, given our species' practical limitation to single births. Rumor has it that the actor Warren Beatty and the athlete Wilt Chamberlain each bedded multiple thousands of women, something not unknown as well among rock stars. They didn't produce children in those numbers. Modern birth control limits that, but similar celebrity types in the past have done so. The forefather of the Qing dynasty, Gioconda, circa 1550, for example, is the male line ancestor of 1.5 million people in northeastern China. The medieval Neil dynasty produced up to 3 million male descendants, localized mainly in northwestern Ireland and the US through Irish immigration. And the king of them all, Genghis Khan, conqueror of much of Asia, is forefather of 8% of the men in Central Asia, 16 million male descendants, 34 generations later. So from a deep biological perspective, there are reasons why parents might favor sons sufficiently to eliminate female fetuses, although I am not claiming direct causality, nor suggesting a lack of other, more culturally dependent reasons. Preferential treatment awarded a son during development might even help produce an attractive, well-rounded, confident man. This happened in the case of the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. By his own account, a man who has been the indisputable favorite of his mother keeps for life the feeling of a conqueror. That confidence of success that often induces real success. Fair enough, but feeling of a conqueror can all too easily become actual conqueror. Genghis Khan's outstanding reproductive success certainly came at the cost of any success whatsoever for others, including the dead millions of Chinese, Persians, Russians, and Hungarians. Spoiling a son might, therefore, work well from the standpoint of the selfish gene, allowing the favored child's genes to replicate themselves in innumerable offspring, to use the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins' famous expression. Yo, Casey Walling, welcome. Thanks so much for swinging by. Spoiling a son, excuse me. All right. Okay. Spoiling a son might therefore work well from the standpoint of the selfish gene, allowing the favored child's genes to replicate themselves in innumerable offspring, to use the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins' famous expression. But it can make for a dark, painful spectacle in the here and now, and mutate into something indescribably dangerous. None of this means that all mothers favor all sons over their daughters, or that daughters are not sometimes favored over sons, or that fathers don't sometimes favor their sons. Other factors can clearly dominate. Sometimes, for example, unconscious hatred, sometimes not so unconscious either, overrides any concern a parent might have for any child, regardless of gender or personality or situation. I saw a 4-year-old boy allowed to go hungry on a regular basis. His nanny had been injured, and he was being cycled through the neighbors for temporary care. When his mother dropped him off at our house, she indicated that he wouldn't eat at all day. That's okay, she said. It wasn't okay, in case that's not obvious. This was the same 4-year-old boy who clung to my wife for hours in absolute desperation and total commitment when she tenaciously, persistently, and mercifully managed to feed him an entire lunchtime meal, rewarding him throughout for his cooperation and refusing to let him fail. He started out with a closed mouth, sitting with all of us at the dining room table. My wife and I, our 2 kids, and 2 neighborhood kids we looked after during the day. She put the spoon in front of him, waiting patiently, persistently, while he moved his head back and forth, refusing its entry. Using defensive methods typical of a recalcitrant and none too well attended to 2-year-old. She didn't let him fail. She patted him on the head every time he managed a mouthful, telling him sincerely that he was a good boy. When he did so, she did think he was a good boy. He was a cute, damaged kid. 10 not too painful minutes later, he finished his meal. We were all watching intently. It was a drama of life and death. "Look," she said, holding up his bowl. "He finished all of it." This boy, who was standing in the corner, voluntarily and unhappily, when I first saw him, who wouldn't interact with the other kids, who frowned chronically, who wouldn't respond to me when I tickled and prodded him, trying to get him to play. This boy broke immediately into a wide, radiant smile. It brought joy to everyone at the table. 20 years later, writing it down today, it still brings me to tears. Afterward, he followed my wife around like a puppy for the rest of the day, refusing to let her out of his sight. When she sat down, he jumped in her lap, cuddling in, opening himself back up to the world, searching desperately for the love he had been continually denied. Later in the day, but far too soon, his mother reappeared. She came down the stairs into the room we all occupied. "Oh, supermom," she uttered, resentfully, seeing her son curled up in my wife's lap. Then she departed, black murderous heart unchanged, doomed child in hand. She was a psychologist. The things you can see, with even a single open eye, it's no wonder that people want to stay blind. Everybody hates arithmetic. My clinical clients frequently come to me to discuss their day-to-day familial problems. Such quotidian concerns are insidious. Their habitual and predictable occurrence makes them appear trivial, but that appearance of triviality is deceptive. It is the things that occur every single day that truly make up our lives, and time spent the same way over and over again adds up at an alarming rate. One father recently spoke with me about the trouble he was having putting his son to sleep at night, a ritual that typically involved about 3/4 of an hour of fighting. We did the arithmetic. 45 minutes a day, 7 days a week. That's 300 minutes, or 5 hours a week. 5 hours for each of the 4 weeks of a month. That's 20 hours per month. 20 hours a month for 12 months is 240 hours a year. That's a month and a half of standard 40-hour work weeks. My client was spending a month and a half of work weeks per year fighting ineffectually and miserably with his son. Needless to say, both were suffering for it. No matter how good your intentions or how sweet and tolerant your temperament, you will not maintain good relations with someone you fight with for a month and a half of work weeks per year. Resentment will inevitably build. Even if it doesn't, all that wasted, unpleasant time could clearly be spent in more productive and useful and less stressful and more enjoyable activity. How are such situations to be understood? Where does the fault lie? In child or in parent? In nature or society? And what, if anything, is to be done? Some localize all such problems in the adult, whether in the parent or broader society. There are no bad children, such people think, only bad parents. When the idealized image of an unsullied child is brought to mind, this notion appears fully justified. The beauty, openness, joy, trust, and capacity for love characterizing children makes it easy to attribute full culpability to the adults on the scene. But such an attitude is dangerously and naively romantic. It's too one-sided. In the case of parents granted a particularly difficult son or daughter, it's also not for the best that all human corruption is uncritically laid at society's feet. That conclusion merely displaces the problem back in time. It explains nothing and solves no problems. If society is corrupt, but not the individuals within it, then where did the corruption originate? How is it propagated? It's a one-sided, deeply ideological theory. Even more problematic is the insistence logically stemming from the presumption of social corruption that all individual problems, no matter how rare, must be solved by cultural restructuring, no matter how radical. Our society faces the increasing call to deconstruct its stabilizing traditions to include smaller and smaller numbers of people who do not or will not fit into the categories upon which even our perceptions are based. This is not a good thing. Each person's private trouble cannot be solved by a social revolution because revolutions are destabilizing and dangerous. We have learned to live together and organize our complex society slowly and incrementally over vast stretches of time, and we do not understand with sufficient exactitude why what we are doing works. Thus, altering our ways of social being carelessly in the name of some ideological shibboleth, diversity springs to mind, is likely to produce far more trouble than good, given the suffering that even small revolutions generally produce. Was it really a good thing, for example, to so dramatically liberalize the divorce laws in the 1960s? It's not clear to me that the children whose lives were destabilized by the hypothetical freedom this attempt at liberation introduced would say so. Horror and terror lurk behind the walls provided so wisely by our ancestors. We tear them down at our peril. We skate unconsciously on thin ice with deep cold waters below where unimaginable monsters lurk. I see today's parents as terrified by their children, not least because they have been deemed the proximal agents of this hypothetical social tyranny and simultaneously denied credit for their role as benevolent and necessary agents of discipline, order, and conventionality. They dwell uncomfortably and self-consciously in the all-too-powerful shadow of the adolescent ethos of the 1960s, a decade whose excesses led to a general denigration of adulthood, an unthinking disbelief in the existence of competent power, and the inability to distinguish between the chaos of immaturity and responsible freedom. This has increased parental sensitivity to the short-term emotional suffering of their children, while heightening their fear of damaging their children to a painful and counterproductive degree. Better this than the reverse, you might argue, but there are catastrophes lurking at the extremes of every moral continuum. The ignoble savage. It has been said that every individual is the conscious or unconscious follower of some influential philosopher. The belief that children have an intrinsically unsullied spirit, damaged only by culture and society, is derived in no small part from the 18th century Genevan French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Rousseau was a fervent believer in the corrupting influence of human society and private ownership alike. He claimed that nothing was so gentle and wonderful as man in his pre-civilized state. At precisely the same time, noting his inability as a father, he abandoned 5 of his children to the tender and fatal mercies of the orphanages of the time. The noble savage Rousseau described, however, was an ideal, an abstraction, archetypal and religious, and not the flesh and blood reality he supposed. The mythologically perfect divine child permanently inhabits our imagination. He's the potential of youth, the newborn hero, the wronged innocent, and the long-lost son of the rightful king. He's the intimations of immorality that accompany our earliest experiences. He's Adam, the perfect man, walking without sin with God in the garden before the fall. But human beings are evil, as well as good. And the darkness that dwells forever in our souls is also there, in no small part in our younger selves. In general, people improve with age rather than worsening, become kinder, more conscientious, and more emotionally stable as they mature. Bullying at the sheer and often terrible intensity of the schoolyard rarely manifests itself in grown-up society. William Golding's dark and anarchistic Lord of the Flies is a classic for a reason. Furthermore, there's plenty of direct evidence that the horrors of human behavior cannot be so easily attributed to history and society. This was discovered most painfully, perhaps, by the primatologist Jane Goodall, beginning in 1974, when she learned that her beloved chimpanzees were capable of and willing to murder each other, to use the terminology appropriate to humans. Because of its shocking nature and great anthropological significance, she kept her observations secret for years, fearing that her contact with the animals had led them to manifest unnatural behavior. Even after she published her account, many refused to believe it. It soon became obvious, however, that what she observed was by no means rare. Bluntly put, Chimpanzees conduct intertribal warfare. Furthermore, they do it with almost unimaginable brutality. The typical full grown chimp is more than twice as strong as a comparable human being, despite their smaller size. Goodall reported with some terror the proclivity of the chimps she studied to snap strong steel cables and levers. Chimps can literally tear each other to pieces, and they do. Human societies and their complex technologies cannot be blamed for that. Often, when I woke in the night, she wrote, horrific pictures sprang unbidden to my mind. Satan, a long observed chimp, cupping his hand below Sniff's chin to drink the blood that welled from a great wound in his face. Joe Mayo, tearing a strip of skin from Dee's thigh. Feigen, charging and hitting again and again the stricken, quivering body of Goliath, one of his childhood heroes. Small gangs of adolescent chimps, mostly male, roam the borders of their territory. If they encounter foreigners, even chimps they once knew, who had broken away from the now too large group, and if they outnumber them, the gang will mob and destroy them without mercy. Chimps don't have much of a superego, and it is prudent to remember that the human capacity for self-control may also be overestimated. Careful perusal of a book as shocking and horrific as Iris Chang's The Rape of Nanking, which describes the brutal decimation of that Chinese city by the invading Japanese, will disenchant even a committed romantic. And the less said about Unit 731, a covert Japanese biological warfare research unit established at that time, the better. Wow. Read about it at your peril. You have been warned. Oh my gosh. I know about that. That's crazy. It's where the Japanese really, those Japanese dudes went crazy on the Chinese, bro. I mean, really. Whew, okay. Hunter-gatherers, too, are much more murderous than their urban industrialized counterparts, despite their communal lives and localized cultures. The yearly rate of homicide in the modern UK is about 1 per 100,000. It's 4 to 5 times higher in the US and about 90 times higher in Honduras, which has the highest rate recorded of any modern nation. But the evidence strongly suggests that human beings have become more peaceful rather than less so, as time has progressed and societies became larger and more organized. The Kong Bushmen of Africa, romanticized in the 1950s by Elizabeth Marshall Thomas as the harmless people, had a yearly murder rate of 40 per 100,000, which declined by more than 30% once they became subject to state authority. This is a very instructive example of complex social structures serving to reduce, not exacerbate, the violent tendencies of human beings. Yearly rates of 300 per 100,000 have been reported for the Yanomami of Brazil, famed for their aggression, but the stats don't max out there. The denizens of Papua New Guinea kill each other at yearly rates ranging from 140 to 1,000 per 100,000. However, the record appears to be held by the Caddo, an indigenous people of California, 1,450 of whom per 100,000 met a violent death circa 1840. Because children, like other human beings, are not only good, they cannot simply be left to their own devices, untouched by society, and bloom into perfection. Even dogs must be socialized if they are to become acceptable members of the pack, and children are much more complex than dogs. This means that they are much more likely to go complexly astray if they are not trained, disciplined, and properly encouraged. This means that it is not just wrong to attribute all the violent tendencies of human beings to the pathologies of social structure. It's wrong enough to be virtually backward. The vital process of socialization prevents much harm and fosters much good. Children must be shaped and informed, or they cannot thrive. This fact is reflected starkly in their behavior. Kids are utterly desperate for attention from both peers and adults, because such attention, which renders them effective and sophisticated communal players, is vitally necessary. Children can be damaged as much or more by a lack of incisive attention as they are by abuse, mental or physical. This is damage by omission rather than commission, but it is no less severe and long-lasting. Children are damaged when their mercifully inattentive parents fail to make them sharp and observant and awake, and leave them instead in an unconscious and undifferentiated state. Children are damaged when those charged with their care are afraid of any conflict or upset, no longer dare to correct them, and leave them without guidance. I can recognize such children on the street. They are doughy and unfocused and vague. They are leaden and dull instead of golden and bright. They are uncarved blocks trapped in a perpetual state of waiting to be. This is a great pod. Thank you, Gravity. Thank you for chilling with us, brother. Thank you. This is a great podcast. Imagine Jordan Peterson reading his own book, 12 Rules for Life, and Kermit the Frog voice. All jokes aside, this book is pretty solid, especially the iconic, if you want to change the world, start by cleaning your room. Yes, Gravity. Amen, brother. Yes, sir, bro. Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much for joining, man. Please subscribe, brother. Join the Flexers. It's a blessing to my career. And smash that like button if you're ready to learn something along with me, man. Thank you. Such children are chronically ignored by their peers. This is because they are not fun to play with. Adults tend to manifest the same attitude, although they will deny it desperately when pressed. When I worked in daycare centers early in my career, the comparatively neglected children would come to me desperately in their fumbling, half-formed manner, with no sense of proper distance and no attentive playfulness. Bro, thank you so much, Gravity. You rock, man. Bro, you rock. Thanks so much, man. When I worked in daycare centers early in my career, the comparatively neglected children would come to me desperately in their fumbling, half-formed manner. With no sense of proper distance and no attentive playfulness, they would flop nearby or directly on my lap, no matter what I was doing. Driven inexorably by the powerful desire for adult attention, the necessary catalyst for further development, it was very difficult not to react with annoyance, even disgust, to such children and their too prolonged infantilism. Difficult not to literally push them aside, even though I felt very badly for them and understood their predicament well. I believe that response, harsh and terrible though it may be, was an almost universally experienced internal warning signal indicating the comparative danger of establishing a relationship with a poorly socialized child. The likelihood of immediate and inappropriate dependence, which should have been the responsibility of the parent, and the tremendous demand of time and resources that accepting such dependence would necessitate. Confronted with such a situation, potentially friendly peers and interested adults are much more likely to turn their attention to interacting with other children whose cost/benefit ratio, to speak bluntly, would be much lower. Parent or friend. The neglect and mistreatment that is part and parcel of poorly structured or even entirely absent disciplinary approaches can be deliberate, motivated by explicit, conscious, if misguided parental motives. But more often than not, modern parents are simply paralyzed by the fear that they will no longer be liked or even loved by their children if they chastise them for any reason. They want their children's friendship above all and are willing to sacrifice respect to get it. This is not good. A child will have many friends, but only two parents, if that, and parents are more, not less than friends. Friends have very limited authority to correct. Every parent, therefore, needs to learn to tolerate the momentary anger or even hatred directed towards them by their children after necessary corrective action has been taken, as the capacity of children to perceive or care about long-term consequences is very limited. Parents are the arbiters of society. They teach children how to behave so that other people will be able to interact meaningfully and productively with them. It is an act of responsibility to discipline a child. It is not anger at misbehavior. It is not revenge for a misdeed. It is instead a careful combination of mercy and long-term judgment. Proper discipline requires effort, indeed, is virtually synonymous with effort. It is difficult to pay careful attention to children. It is difficult to figure out what is wrong and what is right and why. It is difficult to formulate just and compassionate strategies of discipline and to negotiate their application with others deeply involved in a child's care. Because of this combination of responsibility and difficulty, any suggestion that all constraints placed on children are damaging can be perversely welcome. Such a notion, once accepted, allows adults who should know better to abandon their duty to serve as agents of enculturation and pretend that doing so is good for children. It's a deep and pernicious act of self-deception. It's lazy, cruel, and inexcusable. And our proclivity to rationalize does not end there. We assume that rules will irredeemably inhibit what would otherwise be the boundless and intrinsic creativity of our children, even through the scientific literature. Even though the scientific literature clearly indicates, first, that creativity beyond the trivial is shockingly rare, and second, that strict limitations facilitate rather than inhibit creative achievement. Belief in the joined, belief in the purely dis, belief, excuse me, Belief in the purely destructive element of rules and structures frequently conjoined with the idea that children will make good choices about when to sleep and what to eat, if their perfect natures are merely allowed to manifest themselves. These are equally ungrounded assumptions. Children are perfectly capable of attempting to subsist on hot dogs, chicken fingers, and Fruit Loops, if doing so will attract attention, provide power, or shield them from trying anything new. Instead of going to bed wisely and peacefully, children will fight nighttime unconsciousness until they are staggered by fatigue. They are also perfectly willing to provoke adults while exploring the complex contours of the social environment, just like juvenile chimps harassing the adults in their troops. Observing the consequences of teasing and taunting enables chimp and child alike to discover the limits of what might otherwise be a too unstructured and terrifying freedom. Such limits, when discovered, provide security, even if their detection causes momentary disappointment or frustration. I remember taking my daughter to the playground once when she was about 2. She was playing on the monkey bars, hanging in midair. A particularly provocative little monster of about the same age was standing above her on the same bar she was gripping. I watched him move towards her. Our eyes locked. He slowly and deliberately stepped on her hands with increasing force over and over as he stared me down. He knew exactly what he was doing. Up yours, Daddy-O! That was his philosophy. He had already concluded that adults were contemptible, and that he could safely defy them. Too bad, then, that he was destined to become one. That was the hopeless future his parents had saddled him with. To his great and salutary shock, I picked him bodily off the playground structure and threw him 30 feet down the field. No, I didn't. I just took my daughter somewhere else, but it would have been better for him if I had. Imagine a toddler repeatedly striking his mother in the face. Why would he do such a thing? It's a stupid question. It's unacceptably naive. The answer is obvious: to dominate his mother, to see if he can get away with it. Violence, after all, is no mystery. It's peace that's the mystery. Violence is the default. It's easy. It's peace that is difficult, learned, inculcated, earned. People often get basic psychological questions backwards. Why do people take drugs? Not a mystery. It's why they don't take them all the time that's the mystery. Why do people suffer from anxiety? That's not a mystery. How is that people can ever be calm? That's the mystery. We're breakable and mortal. A million things can go wrong in a million ways. We should be terrified out of our skulls at every second, but we're not. The same can be said for depression, laziness, and criminality. If I can hurt and overpower you, then I can do exactly what I want, when I want, even when you're around. I can torment you to appease my curiosity. I can take the attention away from you and dominate you. I can steal your toy. Children hit first because aggression is innate, although more dominant in some individuals and less in others. And second, because aggression facilitates desire. It's foolish to assume that such behavior must be learned. A snake does not have to be taught to strike. It's in the nature of the beast. 2-year-olds, statistically speaking, are the most violent of people. They kick, hit, and bite, and they steal the property of others. They do so to explore, to express outrage and frustration, and to gratify their impulsive desires. More importantly, for our purposes, they do so to discover the true limits of permissible behavior. How else are they ever going to puzzle out what is acceptable? Infants are like blind people, searching for a wall. They have to push forward and test to see where the actual boundaries lie, and those are too seldom where they are said to be. Consistent correction of such action indicates the limits of acceptable aggression to the child. Its absence merely heightens curiosity, so the child will hit and bite and kick, if he is aggressive and dominant, until something indicates a limit. How hard can I hit mommy? Until she objects. Given that, correction is better sooner than later, if the desired end result of the parent is not to be hit. Yeah, of course. Correction also helps the child learn that hitting others is a suboptimal social strategy. Without that correction, no child is going to undergo the effortful process of organizing and regulating their impulses so that those impulses can coexist without conflict within the psyche of the child and in the broader social world. It is no simple matter to organize a mind. My son was particularly ornery when he was a toddler. When my daughter was little, I could paralyze her into immobility with an evil glance. Such an intervention had no effect at all on my son. He had my wife, who was no pushover, stymied at the dinner table by the time he was 9 months of age. He fought her for control over the spoon. Good, we thought. We didn't want to feed him 1 more minute than necessary anyway. But the little blighter would only eat 3 or 4 mouthfuls. Then he would play. Then he would stir his food around in his bowl. He would drop bits of it over the high chair tabletop and watch as it fell on the floor below. No problem. He was exploring. But then he wasn't eating enough. Then, because he wasn't eating enough, he wasn't sleeping enough. Then his midnight crying was waking his parents. Then they were getting grumpy and out of sorts. He was frustrating his mother, and she was taking it out on me. The trajectory wasn't good. After a few days of this degeneration, I decided to take the spoon back. I prepared for war. I set aside sufficient time. A patient adult can defeat a 2-year-old, hard as that is to believe. As the saying goes, old age and treachery can always overcome youth and skill. This was partly because time lasts forever when you're 2. Half an hour for me was a week for my son. I assured myself of victory. He was stubborn and horrible, but I could be worse. We sat down, face to face, bowl in front of him. It was high noon. He knew it, and I knew it. He picked up the spoon. I took it from him and spooned up a delicious mouthful of mush. I moved it deliberately towards his mouth. He eyed me in precisely the same manner as the playground foot monster. He curled his lips downward into a tight frown, rejecting all entry. I chased his mouth around with the spoon as he twisted his head around in tight circles. But I had more tricks up my sleeve. I poked him in the chest, boop, with my free hand in a manner calculated to annoy. Boop, boop, boop. He didn't budge. I did it again, boop, and again, and again. Not hard, but not in a manner to be ignored either. 10 or so pokes later, he opened his mouth, planning to emit a sound of outrage. Ha! His mistake. I deftly inserted the spoon. He tried gamely to force out the offending food with his tongue. But I know how to deal with that too. I just placed my forefinger horizontally across his lips. Some came out. But some was swallowed too. Score 1 for Dad. I gave him a pat on the head and told him he's a good boy. And I meant it. When someone does something you are trying to get them to do, reward them. No grudge after victory. An hour later, it was all over. There was outrage. There was some wailing. My wife had to leave the room. The stress was too much. But food was eaten by child. My son collapsed, exhausted on my chest. We had a nap together, and he liked me a lot better when he woke up than he had before he was disciplined. Aww. This was something I commonly observed when we went head-to-head, and not only with him. A little later, we entered into a babysitting swap with another couple. All the kids would get together at one house. Then one pair of parents would go out to dinner or a movie and leave the other pair to watch the children, who were all under 3. One evening, another set of parents joined us. I was unfamiliar with their son, a large, strong boy of 2. He won't sleep, said his father. After you put him to bed, he will crawl out of his bed and come downstairs. We usually put on an Elmo video and let him watch it. There's no damn way I'm rewarding a recalcitrant child for unacceptable behavior, I thought. And I'm certainly not showing anyone any Elmo video. I always hated that creepy, whiny puppet. He was a disgrace to Jim Henson's legacy. So reward by Elmo was not on the table. I didn't say anything, of course. There's just no talking to parents about their children until they are ready to listen. 2 hours later, we put the kids to bed. 4 of the 5 went promptly to sleep, but not the Muppet aficionado. I had placed him in a crib, however, so he couldn't escape, but he could still howl, and that's exactly what he did. That was tricky. It was good strategy on his part. It was annoying, and it threatened to wake up all the other kids, who would then also start to howl. Score 1 for the kid. So I journeyed into the bedroom. Lie down, I said. That produced no effect. Lie down, I said, or I will lay you down. Reasoning with kids isn't often of too much use, particularly under such circumstances, but I believe in fair warning. Of course, he didn't lie down. He howled again for effect. Kids do this frequently. Scared parents think that a crying child is always sad or hurt. This is simply not true. Anger is one of the most common reasons for crying. Careful analysis of the musculature patterns of crying children has confirmed this. Anger crying and fear or sadness crying do not look the same. They also don't sound the same and can be distinguished with careful attention. Anger crying is often an act of dominance and should be dealt with as such. I lifted him up and laid him down. Gently, patiently, but firmly. He got up. I laid him down. He got up. I laid him down. He got up. I laid him down. This time, I laid him down and kept my hand on his back. He struggled mightily, but ineffectually. He was, after all, only 1/10 my size. I could take him with one hand. So I kept him down and spoke calmly to him and told him he was a good boy and that he should relax. I gave him a soother and pounded gently on his back. He started to relax. His eyes began to close. I removed my hand. He promptly got to his feet. I was impressed. The kid had spirit. I lifted him up and laid him down again. Lie down, monster, I said. I pounded his back gently some more. Some kids find that soothing. He was getting tired. He was ready to capitulate. He closed his eyes. I got to my feet and headed quietly and quickly to the door. I glanced back to check his position one last time. He was back on his feet. I pointed my finger at him. Down, monster, I said, and I meant it. He went down like a shot. I closed the door. We liked each other. Neither my wife nor I heard a peep out of him for the rest of the night. How was the kid? His father asked me when he got home, much later that night. Good, I said. No problem at all. He's asleep right now. Did he get up? Said his father. No, I said. He slept the whole time. Dad looked at me. He wanted to know, but he didn't ask, and I didn't tell. Don't cast pearls before swine, as the old saying goes, and you might think that's harsh, but training your child not to sleep and rewarding him with the antics of a creepy puppet, that's harsh too. You pick your poison, and I'll pick mine. Discipline and punish. Modern parents are terrified of two frequently juxtaposed words, discipline and punish. They evoke images of prisons, soldiers, and jackboots. The distance between disciplinarian and tyrant or punishment and torture is indeed easily traversed. Discipline and punish must be handled with care. The fear is unsurprising, but both are necessary. They can be applied unconsciously or consciously, badly or well, but there's no escaping their use. It's not that it's impossible to discipline with reward. In fact, rewarding good behavior can be very effective. The most famous of all behavioral psychologists, B.F. Skinner, was a great advocate of this approach. He was expert at it. He taught pigeons to play ping pong, although they only rolled the ball back and forth by pecking it with their beaks. But they were pigeons, so even though they played badly, it was still pretty good. Skinner even taught his birds to pilot missiles during the Second World War in Project Pigeon, later Orcon. He got a long way. Before the invention of electronic guidance systems rendered his efforts obsolete, Skinner observed the animals he was training to perform such acts with exceptional care. Any actions that approximated what he was aiming at were immediately followed by a reward of just the right size, not small enough to be inconsequential, and not so large that it devalued future rewards. Such an approach can be used with children and works very well. Imagine that you would like your toddler to help set the table. It's a useful skill. You'd like him better if he could do it. It would be good for his self esteem. So you break the target behavior down into its component parts. One element of setting the table is carrying a plate from the cupboard to the table. Even that might be too complex. Perhaps your child has only been walking a few months. He's still wobbly and unreliable. So you start his training by handing him a plate and having him hand it back. A pat on the head could follow. You might turn it into a game. Pass with your left, switch to your right, circle around your back. Woo wee woo. Then you might give him a plate and take a few steps backwards that he has to traverse a few steps before giving it back. Train him to become a plate handling virtuoso. Don't leave him trapped in his klutzdom. You can teach virtually anyone anything with such an approach. First, figure out what you want. Then, watch the people around you like a hawk. Finally, whenever you see anything a bit more like what you want, swoop in, hawk, remember, and deliver a reward. Your daughter has been very reserved since she became a teenager. You wish you would talk more. That's the target, more communicative daughter. One morning, over breakfast, she shares an anecdote about school. That's an excellent time to pay attention. That's the reward. Stop texting and listen, unless you don't want her to tell you anything ever again. Parental interventions that make children happy clearly can and should be used to shape behavior. The same goes for husbands, wives, coworkers, and parents. Skinner, however, was a realist. He noted that use of reward was very difficult. The observer had to attend patiently until the target spontaneously manifested the desired behavior and then reinforce. This required a lot of time and a lot of waiting, and that's a problem. He also had to starve his animals down to 3/4 of their normal body weight before they would become interested enough in food reward to truly pay attention. But these are not the only shortcomings of the purely positive approach. Negative emotions, like their positive counterparts, help us learn. We need to learn because we're stupid and easily damaged. We can die. That's not good. And we don't feel good about it. If we did, we would seek death, and then we would die. We don't even feel good about dying if it only might happen, and that's all the time. In that manner, negative emotions, for all their unpleasantness, protect us. We feel hurt and scared and ashamed and disgusted so we can avoid damage, and we're susceptible to feeling such things a lot. In fact, we feel more negative about a loss of a given size than we feel good about the same sized gain. Pain is more potent than pleasure, and anxiety more than hope. Emotions, positive and negative, come in two usefully differentiated variants. Satisfaction, technically satiation, tells us what we did was good, while hope, technically incentive reward, indicates that something pleasurable is on the way. Pain hurts us, so we won't repeat actions that produce personal damage or social isolation, as loneliness is also technically a form of pain. Anxiety makes us stay away from hurtful people and bad places so we don't have to feel pain. All these emotions must be balanced against each other and carefully judged in context, but they're all required to keep us alive and thriving. We therefore do our children a disservice by failing to use whatever is available to help them learn, including negative emotions, even though such use should occur in the most merciful possible manner. Skinner knew that threats and punishments could stop unwanted behaviors, just as reward reinforces what is desirable. In a world paralyzed with the thought of interfering with the hypothetically pristine path of natural child development, it can be difficult even to discuss the former techniques. However, children would not have such a lengthy period of natural development prior to maturity if their behavior did not have to be shaped. They would just leap out of the womb, ready to trade stocks. Children also cannot be fully sheltered from fear and pain. They are small and vulnerable. They don't know much about the world. Even when they are doing something as natural as learning to walk, they're constantly being walloped by the world. And this is to say nothing of the frustration and rejection they inevitably experience when dealing with siblings and peers and uncooperative, stubborn adults. Given this, The fundamental moral question is not how to shelter children completely from misadventure and failure, so they never experience any fear or pain, but how to maximize their learning so that useful knowledge may be gained with minimal cost. In the Disney movie Sleeping Beauty, the king and queen have a daughter, the Princess Aurora, after a long wait. They plan a great christening to introduce her to the world. They welcome everyone who loves and honors their new daughter, but they fail to invite Maleficent, malicious, malevolent, who is essentially queen of the underworld, or nature in her negative guise. This means, symbolically, that the two monarchs are overprotecting their beloved daughter by setting up a world around her that has nothing negative in it. But this does not protect her. It makes her weak. Maleficent curses the princess, sentencing her to death at the age of 16, caused by the prick of a spinning wheel's needle. The spinning wheel is the wheel of fate. The prick, which produces blood, symbolizes the loss of virginity, a sign of the emergence of the woman from the child. Fortunately, a good fairy, the positive element of nature, reduces the punishment to unconsciousness, redeemable with love's first kiss. The panicked king and queen get rid of all the spinning wheels in the land and turn their daughter over to the much too nice good fairies, of whom there are 3. They continue with their strategy of removing all dangerous things, but in doing so, they leave their daughter naive, immature, and weak. One day, just before Aurora's 16th birthday, she meets a prince in the forest and falls in love. The same day. By any reasonable standard, that's a bit much. Then she loudly bemoans the fact that she is to be wed to Prince Philip, to whom she was betrothed as a child, and collapses emotionally when she is brought back to her parents' castle for her birthday. It is at that moment that Maleficent's curse manifests itself. A portal opens up in the castle, a spinning wheel appears, and Aurora pricks her finger and falls unconscious. She becomes Sleeping Beauty. In doing so, again symbolically speaking, she chooses unconsciousness over the terror of adult life. Something existentially similar to this occurs very frequently with overprotected children who could be brought low and then desire the bliss of unconsciousness by their first real contact with failure, or worse, genuine malevolence, which they do not or will not understand and against which they have no defense. Take the case of the 3-year-old who has not learned to share. She displays her selfish behavior in the presence of her parents, but they're too nice to intervene. More truthfully, they refuse to pay attention, admit to what is happening, and teach her how to act properly. They're annoyed, of course, when she won't share with her sister, but they pretend everything is okay. It's not okay. They'll snap at her later for something totally unrelated. She will be hurt by that and confused, but learn nothing. Worse, when she tries to make friends, it won't go well. Because of her lack of social sophistication, children her own age will be put off by her inability to cooperate. They'll fight with her or wander off and find someone else to play with. The parents of those children will observe her awkwardness and misbehavior and won't invite her back to play with their kids. She will be lonely and rejected. That will produce anxiety, depression, and resentment. That will produce the turning from life that is equivalent to the wish for unconsciousness. Parents who refuse to adopt the responsibility for disciplining their children think they can just opt out of the conflict necessary for proper child rearing. They avoid being the bad guy in the short term, but they do not at all rescue or protect their children from fear and pain. Quite the contrary. The judgmental and uncaring broader social world will mete out conflict and punishment far greater than that which would have been delivered by an awake parent. You can discipline your children, or you can turn that responsibility over to the harsh, uncaring, judgmental world, and the motivation for the latter decision should never be confused with love. You might object, as modern parents sometimes do. Why should a child even be subject to the arbitrary dictates of a parent? In fact, there is a new variant of politically correct thinking that presumes that such an idea is adultism, a form of prejudice and oppression analogous to, say, sexism or racism. The question of adult authority must be answered with care. That requires a thorough examination of the question itself. Accepting an objection as formulated is halfway to accepting its validity, and that can be dangerous if the question is ill posed. Let's break it down. First, why should a child be subject? That's easy. Every child must listen to and obey adults because he or she is dependent on the care that one or more imperfect grown-ups is willing to bestow. Given this, it is better for the child to act in a manner that invites genuine affection and goodwill. Something even better might be imagined. The child could act in a manner that simultaneously ensures optimal adult attention, in a manner that benefits his or her present state of being and future development. That's a very high standard, but it's in the best interests of the child, so there is every reason to aspire to it. Every child should also be taught to comply gracefully with the expectations of civil society. This does not mean crushed into mindless ideological conformity. It means instead that parents must reward those attitudes and actions that will bring their child success in the world outside the family, and use threat and punishment when necessary to eliminate behaviors that will lead to misery and failure. There's a tight window of opportunity for this as well, so getting it right quickly matters. If a child has not been taught to behave properly by the age of 4, it will forever be difficult for him or her to make friends. The research literature is quite clear on this. This matters because peers are the primary source of socialization after the age of 4. Rejected children cease to develop because they are alienated from their peers. They fall further and excuse me. They fall further and further behind as the other children continue to progress. Thus, the friendless child too often becomes a lonely, antisocial, or depressed teenager and adult. This is not good. Much more of our sanity than we commonly realize is a consequence of our fortunate immersion in a social community. We must be continually reminded to think and act properly. When we drift, people that care for and love us nudge us in small ways and large back on track. So we better have some of those people around. It's also not the case, back to the question, that adult dictates are all arbitrary. That's only true in a dysfunctional totalitarian state. But in civilized open societies, the majority abide by a functional social contract aimed at a mutual betterment, or at least at existence in close proximity without too much violence. Even a system of rules that allows for only that minimum contract is by no means arbitrary, given the alternatives. If a society does not adequately reward productive pro-social behavior, insists upon distributing resources in a markedly arbitrary and unfair manner, and allows for theft and exploitation, it will not remain conflict-free for long. If its hierarchies are based only or even primarily on power, instead of the competence necessary to get important and difficult things done, it will be prone to collapse as well. This is even true in simpler form of the hierarchies of chimpanzees, which is an indication of its fundamental, biological, and non-arbitrary emergent truth. Poorly socialized children have terrible lives. Thus, it is better to socialize them optimally. Some of this can be done with reward, but not all of it. The issue is therefore not whether to use punishment and threat. The issue is whether to do it consciously and thoughtfully. How then should children be disciplined? This is a very difficult question because children and parents differ vastly in their temperaments. Some children are agreeable. They deeply want to please, but pay for that with a tendency to be conflict averse and dependent. Others are tougher minded and more independent. Those kids want to do what they want, when they want, all the time. They can be challenging, non-compliant, and stubborn. Some children are desperate for rules and structure and are content even in rigid environments. Others, with little regard for predictability and routine, are immune to demands for even minimal necessary order. Some are wildly imaginative and creative, and others more concrete and conservative. These are all deep, important differences, heavily influenced by biological factors and difficult to modify socially. It is fortunate indeed that in the face of such variability, we are the beneficiaries of much thoughtful meditation on the proper use of social control. Minimum necessary force. Here's a straightforward initial idea. Rules should not be multiplied beyond necessity. Alternatively stated, bad laws drive out respect for good laws. This is the ethical, even legal equivalent of Occam's razor, the scientist's conceptual guillotine, which states that the simplest possible hypothesis is preferable. So don't encumber children or their disciplinarians with too many rules. That path leads to frustration. Limit the rules, then figure out what to do when one of them gets broken. A general context independent rule for punishment severity is hard to establish. However, a helpful norm has already been enshrined in English common law, one of the great products of Western civilization. Its analysis can help us establish a second useful principle. English common law allows you to defend your rights, but only in a reasonable manner. Someone breaks into your house. You have a loaded pistol. You have a right to defend yourself, but it's better to do it in stages. What if it's a drunk and confused neighbor? Shoot him, you think, but it's not that simple. So you say instead, stop, I have a gun. If that produces neither explanation nor retreat, you might consider a warning shot. Then, if the perpetrator still advances, you might take aim at his leg. Don't mistake any of this for legal advice. It's an example. A single brilliantly practical principle can be used to generate all of these incrementally more severe reactions, that of minimum necessary force. So now we have two general principles of discipline. The first, limit the rules. The second, use the least force necessary to enforce those rules. About the first principle, you might ask, limit the rules to what exactly? Here are some suggestions. Do not bite, kick, or hit, except in self-defense. Do not torture and bully other children so you don't end up in jail. Eat in a civilized and thankful manner so that people are happy to have you at their house and pleased to feed you. Learn to share so other kids will play with you. Pay attention when spoken to by adults so they don't hate you and might therefore deign to teach you something. Go to sleep properly and peaceably so that your parents can have a private life and not resent your existence. Take care of your belongings because you need to learn how and because you're lucky to have them. Be good company when something fun is happening so that you're invited for the fun and so that other people are happy you're around so that people will want you around. A child who knows these rules will be welcome everywhere. About the second equally important principle, your question might be, what is minimum necessary force? This must be established experimentally, starting with the smallest possible intervention. Some children will be turned to stone by a glare. A verbal command will stop another. A thumb-cocked flick of the index finger on a small hand might be necessary for some. Such a strategy is particularly useful in public places such as restaurants. It can be administered suddenly, quietly, and effectively without risking escalation. What's the alternative? A child who is crying angrily, demanding attention, is not making himself popular. A child who is running from table to table and disrupting everyone's peace is bringing disgrace, an old word, but a good one, on himself and his parents. Such outcomes are far from optimal, and children will definitely misbehave more in public because they are experimenting, trying to establish that the same old rules also apply in the new place. They don't sort that out verbally. Not when they are under 3. When our children were little and we took them to restaurants, they attracted smiles. They sat nicely and ate politely. They couldn't keep it up for long, but we didn't keep them there too long. When they started to get antsy after sitting for 45 minutes, we knew it was time to go. That was part of the deal. Nearby diners would tell us how nice it was to see a happy family. We weren't always happy, and our children weren't always properly behaved, but they were most of the time. And it was wonderful to see people responding so positively to their presence. It was truly good for the kids. They could see that people liked them. This also reinforced their good behavior. That was the reward. People will really like your kids if you give them the chance. This is something I learned as soon as we had our first baby, our daughter, Michaela. When we took her down the street in her little fold-up stroller in our French Montreal working-class neighborhood, rough-looking, heavy-drinking lumberjack types would stop in their tracks and smile at her. They would coo and giggle and make stupid faces. Watching people respond to children restores your faith in human nature. All that's multiplied when your kids behave in public. To ensure that such things happen, you have to discipline your children carefully and effectively. And to do that, You have to know something about reward and about punishment instead of shying away from the knowledge. Part of establishing a relationship with your son or daughter is learning how that small person responds to a disciplinary intervention and then intervening effectively. It's very easy to mouth cliches instead, such as, there's no excuse for physical punishment, or hitting children merely teaches them to hit. Let's start with the former claim. There is no excuse for physical punishment. First, we should note that widespread consensus around the idea that some forms of misbehavior, particularly those associated with theft and assault, are both wrong and should be subject to sanction. Second, we should note that almost all those sanctions involve punishment in its many psychological and more directly physical forms. Deprivation of liberty causes pain in a manner essentially similar to that of physical trauma. The same can be said of the use of social isolation, including timeout. We know this neurobiologically. The same brain areas mediate response to all three, and all are ameliorated by the same class of drugs, opiates. Jail is clearly physical punishment, particularly solitary confinement, even when nothing violent happens. Third, we should note that some misbegotten actions must be brought to a halt, both effectively and immediately, not least so that something worse doesn't happen. What's the proper punishment for someone who will not stop poking a fork into an electrical socket, or who runs away laughing in a crowded supermarket parking lot? The answer is simple. Whatever will stop it fastest within reason, because the alternative could be fatal. That's pretty obvious in the case of parking lot or outlet, but the same thing applies in the social realm, and that brings us to the fourth point regarding excuses for physical punishment. The penalties for misbehavior, of the sort that could have been effectively halted in childhood, become increasingly severe as children get older, and it is disproportionately those who remain unsocialized effectively by age 4 who end up punished explicitly by society in their later youth and early adulthood. Those unconstrained 4-year-olds, those unconstrained 4-year-olds in turn are often those who are unduly aggressive by nature at age 2. They were statistically more likely than their peers to kick, hit, bite, and take away toys, later known as stealing. They comprise about 5% of boys and a much smaller percentage of girls. To unthinkably parrot the magic line, there's no excuse for physical punishment, is also to foster the delusion that teenage devils magically emerge from once innocent little child angels. You're not doing your child any favors by overlooking any misbehavior, particularly if he or she is temperamentally more aggressive. To hold the no excuse for physical punishment theory is also to assume that the word no can be effectively uttered to another person in the absence of a threat of punishment. A woman can say no to a powerful narcissistic man only because she has social norms, the law and the state backing her up. A parent can only say no to a child who wants a third piece of cake because he or she is larger, stronger, and more capable than the child, and is additionally backed up in his authority by law and state. What no means in the final analysis is always, if you continue to do that, something you do not like will happen to you. Otherwise, it means nothing. Or worse, it means another nonsensical nothing muttered by ignorable adults. Or worse still, it means all adults are ineffectual and weak. This is a particularly bad lesson when every child's destiny is to become an adult, and when most things that are learned without undue personal pain are modeled or explicitly taught by adults. What does a child who ignores adults and holds them in contempt have to look forward to? Why grow up at all? And that's the story of Peter Pan, who thinks all adults are variants of Captain Hook, tyrannical and terrified of his own mortality. Think hungry crocodile with a clock in his stomach. The only time no ever means no, in the absence of violence, is when it is uttered by one civilized person to another. And what about the idea that hitting a child merely teaches them to hit? First, no. Wrong. Too simple. For starters, hitting is a very unsophisticated word to describe the disciplinary act of an effective parent. If hitting accurately described the entire range of physical force, then there would be no difference between rain droplets and atom bombs. Magnitude matters, and so does context. If we're not being willfully blind and naive about the issue, if we're not being willfully blind and naive about the issue, every child knows the difference between being bitten by a mean, unprovoked dog and being nipped by his own pet when he tries playfully but too carelessly to take its bone. How hard someone is hit and why they are hit cannot merely be ignored when speaking of hitting. Timing, part of context, is also of crucial importance. If you flick your 2-year-old with your finger just after he smacks the baby on the head with a wooden block, he will get the connection and be at least somewhat less willing to smack her again in the future. That seems like a good outcome. He certainly won't conclude that he should hit her more, using the flick of the mother's finger as an example. He's not stupid, he's just jealous, impulsive, and not very sophisticated. And how else are you going to protect his younger sibling? If you discipline ineffectively, then the baby will suffer. Maybe for years, the bullying will continue because you won't do a damn thing to stop it. You'll avoid the conflict that's necessary to establish peace. You'll turn a blind eye. And then later, when the younger child confronts you, maybe even in adulthood, you'll say, I never knew it was like that. You just didn't want to know. So you didn't. You just rejected the responsibility of discipline and justified it with a continual show of your niceness. Every gingerbread house has a witch inside it that devours children. So, where does all that leave us? With the decision to discipline effectively or to discipline ineffectively, but never the decision to forego discipline altogether, because nature and society will punish in a draconian manner whatever errors of childhood behavior remain uncorrected. So here are a few practical hints. Timeout can be an extremely effective form of punishment, particularly if the misbehaving child is welcome as soon as he controls his temper. An angry child should sit by himself until he calms down. Then he should be allowed to return to normal life. That means the child wins instead of his anger. The rule is, come be with us as soon as you can behave properly. This is a very good deal for child, parent, and society. You'll be able to tell if your child has really regained control. You'll like him again, despite his earlier misbehavior. If you're still mad, maybe he hasn't completely repented. Or maybe you should do something about your tendency to hold a grudge. If your child is the kind of determined varmint who simply runs away laughing when placed on the steps or in his room, physical restraint might have to be added to the timeout routine. A child can be held carefully but firmly by the upper arms until he or she stops squirming and pays attention. If that fails, being turned over a parent's knee might be required. For the child who is pushing the limits in a spectacularly inspired way, a swat across the backside can indicate requisite seriousness on the part of a responsible adult. There are some situations in which even that will not suffice, partly because some children are very determined, exploratory, and tough, or because the offending behavior is truly severe. And if you're not thinking such things through, then you're not acting responsibly as a parent. You're leaving the dirty work to someone else who will be much dirtier doing it. A summary of principles. Disciplinary principle 1. Limit the rules. Principle 2. Use minimum necessary force. Here's a third. Parents should come in pairs. Raising young children is demanding and exhausting. Because of this, it's easy for a parent to make a mistake. Insomnia, hunger, the aftermath of an argument, a hangover, a bad day at work. Any of these things singly can make a person unreasonable, while in combination they can produce someone dangerous. Under such circumstances, it is necessary to have someone else around to observe and step in and discuss. This will make it less likely that a whiny, provocative child and her fed-up, cranky parent will excite each other to the point of no return. Parents should come in pairs so the father of a newborn can watch the new mother so she won't get worn out and do something desperate after hearing her colicky baby wail from 11 in the evening until 5 in the morning for 30 nights in a row. I am not saying we should be mean to single mothers, many of whom struggle impossibly and courageously, and a proportion of whom have had to escape singly from a brutal relationship. But that doesn't mean we should pretend that all family forms are equally viable. They're not, period. Here's a fourth principle, one that is more particularly psychological. Parents should understand their own capacity to be harsh, vengeful, arrogant, resentful, angry, and deceitful. Very few people set out consciously to do a terrible job as father or mother. But bad parenting happens all the time. This is because people have a great capacity for evil as well as good, and because they remain willfully blind to that fact. People are aggressive and selfish, as well as kind and thoughtful. For this reason, hey, Digitos. Love Jordan Peterson? Yes, sir. Thank you so much for joining the live, brother. Hey, it'd be a blessing if you followed, man. I appreciate that with all my heart, man. It'd be a blessing to my career. And look, yeah, like the stream if you're learning something. Subscribe on the YouTube, follow on the Twitch, follow on Kick, man. It's a blessing, man. Thank you. We're all here to level up and learn together. Let's get right back into it. Thank you, bro. This is because people have a great capacity for evil as well as good, and because they remain willfully blind to that fact. People are aggressive and selfish, as well as kind and thoughtful. For this reason, no adult human being, no hierarchical predatory ape can truly tolerate being dominated by an upstart child. Revenge will come. 10 minutes after a pair of all too nice and patient parents have failed to prevent a public tantrum at the local supermarket, they will pay their toddler back with the cold shoulder when he runs up, excited, to show mom and dad his newest accomplishment. Enough embarrassment, disobedience, and dominance challenge, and even the most hypothetically selfless parent will become resentful. And then the real punishment will begin. Resentment breeds the desire for vengeance. Fewer spontaneous offers of love will be offered, with more rationalizations for their absence. Fewer opportunities for the personal development of the child will be sought out. A subtle turning away will begin. And this is only the beginning of the road to total familial warfare, conducted mostly in the underworld, underneath the false facade of normality and love. This frequently traveled path is much better avoided. A parent who is seriously aware of his or her limited tolerance and capacity for misbehavior when provoked can therefore seriously plan a proper disciplinary strategy, particularly if monitored by an equally awake partner, and never let things degenerate to the point where genuine hatred emerges. Beware. There are toxic families everywhere. They make no rules and limit no misbehavior. The parents lash out randomly and unpredictably. The children live in that chaos and are crushed if they're timid or rebel counterproductively if they're tough. It's not good. It can get murderous. Here's a fifth and final and most general principle. Parents have a duty to act as proxies for the real world. Merciful proxies, caring proxies, but proxies nonetheless. This obligation supersedes any responsibility to ensure happiness, foster creativity, or boost self-esteem. It is the primary duty of parents to make their children socially desirable. That will provide the child with opportunity, self-regard, and security. It's more important even than fostering individual identity. Excuse me. That holy grail can only be pursued in any case after a high degree of social sophistication has been established. The good child and the responsible parent. A properly socialized 3-year-old is polite and engaging. She's also no pushover. She evokes interest from other children and appreciation from adults. She exists in a world where other kids welcome her and compete for her attention, and where adults are happy to see her, instead of hiding behind false smiles. She will be introduced to the world by people who are pleased to do so. This will do more for her eventual individuality than any cowardly parental attempt to avoid day-to-day conflict and discipline. Discuss your likes and dislikes with regards to your children with your partner, or, failing that, a friend. But do not be afraid to have likes and dislikes. You can judge suitable from unsuitable, and wheat from chaff. You realize the difference between good and evil. Having clarified your stance, having assessed yourself for pettiness, arrogance, and resentment, you take the next step, and you make your children behave. You take responsibility for their discipline. You take responsibility for the mistakes you will inevitably make while disciplining. You can apologize even when you're wrong and learn to do better. You love your kids, after all, if their actions make you dislike them. Think what an effect they will have on other people who care much less about them than you. Those other people will punish them severely by omission or commission. Don't allow that to happen. Better to let your little monsters know what is desirable and what is not, so they become sophisticated denizens of the world outside the family. A child who pays attention instead of drifting and can play and does not whine and is comical but not annoying and is trustworthy, that child will have friends wherever he goes. His teachers will like him, and so will his parents. If he attends politely to adults, he will be attended to, smiled at, and happily instructed. He will thrive in what can so easily be a cold, unforgiving, and hostile world. Clear rules make for secure children and calm, rational parents. Clear principles of discipline and punishment balance mercy and justice so that social development and psychological maturity can be optimally promoted. Clear rules and proper discipline help the child and the family and society. Establish, maintain, and expand the order that is all that protects us from chaos and the terrors of the underworld, where everything is uncertain, anxiety-provoking, hopeless, and depressing. There are no greater gifts that a committed and courageous parent can bestow. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Jacob the Flexen crew, thank you so much for joining me for rule number 5 of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Tomorrow evening, we'll read another chapter, and we'll have an amazing time. Like the live stream if you learned something. Subscribe if you want to learn more. Hit that bell notification so you know when I'm live. But listen, you don't believe in yourself? Well, God did, and God does. Yeah!